interviewee in 2022 is Sam Saarinen. Very briefly, let me tell you a bit about Sam. He is an artificial intelligence researcher and founder of Edapt Technologies. He holds a Ph.D. in computer science from Brown University. His current work focuses on personalized instruction and practice and adaptive assessment. Wow. He is the author of the book, Education, the Next 100 Years. Welcome, Sam, and thank you for accepting our invitation for the interview. It's a great pleasure for us from SEST to interview you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going straight to the questions, and I'll let you talk about whatever you want, okay? My first question is, what is AI and artificial intelligence? So if people don't know what it is, and what are some reasonable expectations about what it can do? And I think it's good also to talk about what AI cannot do. Can do and cannot do.
Yeah, so this is an excellent question, partly because I think there's a lot of confusion about what AI is. We'll see kind of in the movies or in other media, AI will kind of be presented fictionally as like an intelligent robot being able to talk and communicate with other people. And that's very far from the reality when it comes to education. So generally speaking, artificial intelligence is a set of techniques for emulating rational behavior. And really it's about automated problem solving. And that definition may make you think, oh, it can solve anything, but really what that means is taking a specific kind of problem and then allowing a system to adapt to small changes in the context of that problem in order to solve it. One of the biggest sub areas in artificial intelligence is called machine learning, and is really an extension of statistics, deriving information from data in order to make decisions or to affect the behavior of an algorithm. So some pretty neat examples of what machine learning has been able to do in the last 5 to 15 years. We're able to identify objects and images. That's, I think, a really exciting breakthrough, being able to work with image data. We're also able to make predictions. So like weather forecasts, for example, are an example of machine learning. And so there's a lot of really exciting results in machine learning where we're able to use data. We need a lot of it. And we have some objective performance measure, like did we make the correct prediction, or did we get the label correct on the image? And we also have a clearly defined goal. If we have those three things, lots of data, an easy to compute performance measure, and a clear goal, there's a lot of specific problems that we're able to solve. So I would say generally, if you have those three criteria, there's a good chance that it can be solved using AI. The limitations of AI become more obvious as soon as you try to solve problems that are a little bit more general. If you have anything that isn't well defined, or where maybe it needs to be able to adapt to things you don't know about while you're designing the system, AI becomes very fragile and is not able to solve those problems well. A good example is like using a robot. If the robot is only ever in a room that has exactly the same objects, and those objects are in exactly the same positions, you can easily make a program for the robot that will be able to manipulate those objects or solve some challenging task. But if you introduce something unexpected or uncertain into the robot's environment, like a 2-year-old child or maybe an earthquake, suddenly the robot is not able to solve problems anymore because its context has changed and it just doesn't have the versatility to deal with everything that could have happened. So to kind of reiterate, AI is about solving problems automatically, but those have to be fairly specific problems where we have lots of data available that give us insight into how to solve them.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask about education also, and then I am going to add one more thing. Why is artificial intelligence and education a good combination? Or is it a good combination? First of all, is it a good combination? If so, why is it a good combination?
Yeah, so I think artificial intelligence is a great tool for addressing some issues in education. And I think that education is a great problem domain for artificial intelligence. But I also work in those areas, so maybe my opinion is a little bit biased. I think some of the really neat things about education is that there is a lot of data available, particularly now that there are things like online courses. You can easily collect assessment results or engagement behaviors from thousands of students. And there are sometimes reasonably well-defined goals, like we want students to be able to do a specific thing or solve a particular problem. If we have that goal that we can measure quantitatively and we have lots of data and we're able to kind of improve our algorithm quickly by measuring our performance on the goal, that's a really great candidate for improving things using artificial intelligence. The other thing is that I think education, maybe even more so than other fields, is pretty difficult for humans to do well. There are definitely good teachers out there, but when it comes to really understanding like each student or being able to take actions that are able to best help each of many different types of students, I think it's very difficult for teachers and humans to multitask to that level. So I think AI has some maybe added value because of its ability to deal with such a large scale in terms of numbers of students.
Mm-hmm. So you would consider that AI would be a tool for the teacher, right? A great tool for the teacher exactly. Because he can use AI in such situations and also adapt other important tasks that he can do with the students, right? So right. The machine does part of the job, let's say part of the job, and the teacher, the other part of the job that is creativity and care and more attention towards the students, is something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's definitely a good synergy between the things that AI is good at, namely processing data, and the things that human teachers are good at, which is being compassionate and empathetic and being able to help individual students and kind of coach them through difficult parts of their learning.
Yeah, but the machine also does the part of the individual learning, right? Or teaching, I don't know.
Yeah, so there's kind of, I think, a collaboration that has to happen. We are not at a point where artificial intelligence can, say, generate good explanations for new topics. If there's a lot of existing examples of explanations, it can kind of recycle what's been used. But in terms of explaining things in a way that's clear to students, that definitely requires at least one teacher. But in terms of being able to select explanations that might be applicable to a given student, that's a problem that AI is really well suited to.
Great. Why are there so few people working in the intersection of AI and education?
Yeah, there's definitely some people in the in this kind of intersection of areas, but it's not nearly as much as you would expect, particularly given the number of applied AI researchers working in other fields like healthcare or even other areas of science. I think part of the challenge is that AI is a very math-centric discipline. In order to be good at it, you have to develop a lot of skills in statistics and computer programming. You have to be able to design good experiments. In contrast, education is really about people. There's definitely some content knowledge that you need, and understanding statistics might be helpful, but there's a lot of other things in education, like understanding student motivation, understanding student insecurities or goals. And those things are difficult to make quantitative. So I think that these two different fields tend to train up people in two different skill sets, and finding people who can communicate between both of those skill sets is pretty uncommon.
So teachers will not be replaced by the machine. Not yet.
Yeah, certainly not in the near future.
Okay. What are the biggest applications of artificial intelligence to education?
Yeah, so we've kind of touched on this already, but I think a lot of it is the areas where there's lots of data, maybe where it's hard for teachers to do it well or to do it at scale, and where we have a clearly defined objective. So one of my areas of specialty is in building adaptive assessments. and kind of automatically finding the best ways to figure out what students know. That's something where AI is kind of uniquely suited. It's all about data. And once you have the assessment items created, like the questions that are asked of students, an AI system, particularly I use reinforcement learning, can be used to select questions that maximize the information we get about students. Some other areas are coaching students through regular review. A lot of students lack the study habits needed to really learn efficiently. A lot of students cram before exams, which is inefficient and also leads to them forgetting shortly after the test. So a much better strategy is for students to practice a small amount every day, but no teacher has the bandwidth to remind every student to practice something every day. A computerized system doesn't get tired and doesn't get bored, so there's no problem using it to help students to memorize things efficiently or to practice new skills. Another thing that we've already mentioned is recommending kind of personalized content. So maybe depending on their backgrounds or their goals, students might engage with different pieces of content more easily. And an AI system can automatically measure how effective each of those pieces of content is in improving the learning for each student.
Great, great. What are some of the barriers to improving education using artificial intelligence? And why is it so hard to bring education products and services to the market?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different aspects to this difficulty. Part of it is inherent. The problem is hard, education is hard. It's easy to solve the wrong problem. Particularly as an AI researcher, I can often see a problem that looks like it can be easily solved with data, but then I've missed out on some subtlety to the problem or some difficulty. One of the things that came up in my early years as a grad student was I was doing some research on assessments, and some teachers pointed out to me that if students get too many questions that are too hard for them, they can lose some confidence in themselves and they can feel like maybe they aren't equipped to take that class or to continue studying it. And thinking about student confidence is kind of a different concern than thinking about maximizing the information that we get about what they know. So it's an inherently hard problem. I think it's also difficult to kind of communicate between the different stakeholders. Educators typically are not equipped to evaluate whether an AI solution is good. And I think AI and technologists are usually poorly equipped to understand the needs of schools that may not have anything to do with the technical aspects of their solution. A really big thing is that student data privacy is a big deal. And there's a lot of legislation that places specific requirements on what data can be released to whom and how. And there can be issues like needing to collect consent from parents or guardians or from the students themselves. And those kinds of legal complications can also make it difficult to release a product that would otherwise be beneficial to the students.
So legal issues, privacy, security do interfere in this process of acquiring and using AI in education or in another area, specific area, right?
Yeah, that's definitely an added difficulty. I think also in education, it can be tricky because everyone wants to believe that they're doing a good job. And so I think maybe even more so than other areas, suggesting that there's a tool that might make the job easier or help teachers do better, it can be a delicate situation to have those conversations and really have them grounded in facts.
How will AI change the roles of humans, teachers and students? I love this question. Teachers and students in the education in the next few years, or in the future. In the future.
So we've already touched on the role of teachers a little bit in that. I think the good news for teachers is a lot of the boring work is going to go away. Grading tests, grading assignments, following up with students to turn things in, those things can all be automated. And I think as a teacher myself, that's a really exciting proposition. I've done teaching for 9 years now. And like, I'm never excited to do grading of assignments. I'm always excited to connect with a student and to help them to understand why something matters, or to kind of persevere until they get something. So I imagine for a lot of educators, AI kind of automating some of those boring things will be very exciting. For students, I think it will definitely change what education looks like a little bit. Because we've been so reliant on a small number of teachers to teach a large number of students, we've had a lot of lessons that are designed kind of as lectures. One teacher is speaking to a lot of students. They all go through the same material, because that's the only way that the teacher can keep up with all of those different students. With an AI system, there's going to be a lot more independence and flexibility for students. They might be able to take on more personalized projects, or to focus more on the areas where they're struggling in particular. I also think AI can present a lot of opportunities for kind of an adaptation of teaching and learning, where opportunities can be pointed out to teachers or learners to change their behavior, or to change how they interact with each other. So as an example, AI can be used to identify students who maybe are struggling or might be feeling unmotivated. And I think that it can be used to facilitate more of those kind of genuine human connections between instructors and students.
Okay. What are some ways non-experts can work to improve education?
Yeah, I think that there are lots of ways that some of the big ideas in computing, thinking about processes and information and data, can be used to help improve educational processes, even without the use of computers. So one of the things that maybe non-technical people can do is they can think about how they can collect data about education. If you're not measuring something, it's very difficult to improve. Kind of related to that, I think that education experts are able to define good goals. Lots of times we can fall into a trap of testing something and then teaching to the test, and only after the fact do we realize maybe the test wasn't that good to begin with. And so being careful about how we define the objectives for education can help us to do a better job. So once we're collecting data and then thinking about goals, then we can start thinking about processes. And I actually think there's a lot of opportunities for kind of traditional education to maybe revamp their processes by thinking with this kind of process and data-oriented mindset. One of the things I think is interesting is that schools, a lot of them will use scheduling in blocks. So every class will have a period of the same length. So like high schools in the US, it's very common to have maybe 7 periods, which are each between 45 minutes and an hour long. And that never really made sense to me, because some topics are just harder than others or have more details to cover. And so giving the same amount of time to all of these different subjects throughout the day, also not accounting for the fact that students might be more tired in the early afternoon. I think that those kinds of decisions, maybe we could revisit, and we could think about, is there a way of scheduling efficiently? Maybe taking advantage of modern computational tools like spreadsheets to design schedules that are more attentive to the differences between the material that we're teaching. Another thing is that I think teaching is fundamentally limited right now by the number of teachers. And this has only gotten worse with COVID and a lot of the other challenges that have been placed on schools logistically. Getting enough teachers in the door, able to be in front of students is hard. One of the solutions to that might be to work on coaching up more student TAs. What we do have is a lot of students. And if we take, say, seniors or juniors in high school, or older students in other settings, and have them prepare some of the content or run reviews for classes, can reduce the demand on teachers to prepare that content or to facilitate it. I also think that can be a good teaching opportunity for those students because they'll get to reinforce that content and also develop their communication skills.
Do you think both teachers and students are prepared for having or working with artificial intelligence? Are they really prepared for that? Or there is something that they have to do in between before they start really adopting and using artificial intelligence in education? What is lacking? Or perhaps it's not lacking anything, I don't know.
I think that there's definitely a lack of understanding around the limitations of AI. One of the things that I see a lot of is that technology companies are very eager to sell the positive points of their technology. And I think for a non-technical audience, it can be easy to accept that without questioning. So one of the dangers is that, for example, an instructor might take the recommendation of an AI system without thinking about how it arrived at that answer. And if the AI system is imperfect, which unfortunately most of them are, sometimes that can lead to bad outcomes for students. One of the big things that teachers and students can do is to ask how confident the system should be in its answer. Does the system have a measure of its uncertainty in an outcome? This is a really big deal with test scores, for example, because a student who comes along and answers the questions in a way that was very unexpected, we may not have an accurate score for them in terms of what they actually know. They may be kind of outside of the data that was used to train the system. So it's very important for teachers and students to be able to identify some of those outliers and to be able to think about some of the things that the systems cannot do well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about the institutions, the educational institutions or organizations? Are they really prepared for the new outcomes?
Yeah, I think that there's the same issue of they need to be able to identify the limitations, but in addition to that, institutions should be thinking about how to collect data and how to measure the impact of systems that they do adopt. One of the worst things you could do is just start using a system and then never measure or assess whether it's actually improving things. So I think institutions should think a lot about how they collect data about the efficacy of the systems that they do adopt. And they should think about other kinds of data they could be collecting that then maybe algorithms could be applied to improve results, say different course recommendations or other systems of the school that could be improved by collecting more data.
Mm-hmm. But do you think the services that offer artificial intelligence to schools, they really train the people, they really know exactly what people need in order to adopt artificial intelligence in their institutions? Or the services are so-so? How to analyze, how to make sure that a service is good enough for you to use in your institution, educational institution? How do you judge this? How can you evaluate the service?
Yeah. So different services, they have different quality, and some of the questions that institutions should ask. The first one is whether or not there's data suggesting that there is a benefit or should be a benefit to using the system. Just because something uses machine learning doesn't mean that it improves education. So that's kind of the first question, is asking whether there's any data behind it, or at least some data-based theory. The second thing is that that benefit needs to be compared to a baseline. Lots of times, education studies work like this. We get a group of students, they don't know anything, we do a thing, and then they know more. And it seems like, wow, that thing produced a benefit. But lots of students, if you tell them something is going to be on a test, they'll go off and study it on their own, even if you don't do any teaching or help them in any way. And so it's really important to compare it to a baseline. Like what would have happened if the system were not used. Being able to run controlled studies where maybe some of the students use the system and some don't is one of the best ways of evaluating whether or not it's actually producing the effect that it claims to have. Mm-hmm. The third thing is that, like I mentioned before, you want to really look for systems that are able to identify when they might be wrong. It's important for a system to be able to, say, estimate its uncertainty, or at least indicate, say, that it doesn't have enough data to make a good recommendation. And then there are kind of two other things which are a little bit different from just the data and the benefit of the system. One is related to usability. Systems should be flexible and they should accommodate the teachers who are using them. So if there's an AI system that does not allow for an instructor to adjust the way that it handles a particular student or doesn't allow them to export the data and do their own work with it or adjust any of the grades, that's not really a good fit for the educational institution. The other thing that institutions should look at is what the financial incentives are for the technology provider. If the technology provider gets paid, say, a flat rate for everyone who uses the system, they don't really get paid more if they make the system better. And so there's a little bit of a disincentive to put in extra work, which could be very expensive and difficult, in order to improve the educational results, unless there's some kind of financial relationship between the educational outcomes and the service itself. That can make the contracts a lot more complicated, which is one of the downsides. But I think if institutions really want to be sure that they're getting the best results for their students, they should try to form agreements with technology providers where the technology provider has a financial incentive to provide better education and not just to provide their existing technology product.
Are there many schools in the States using AI in education?
It depends on the degree of AI that you're talking about. So a lot of search engines use various aspects of artificial intelligence techniques, from recommendation engines to reinforcement learning to natural language processing. And I think almost every school in the United States has students using search engines to find answers. In terms of education-specific tools, it really depends on the resources of the school. I think a lot of well-resourced schools are looking into technological solutions to challenging problems. There's also a variety of nonprofits offering AI. So there are online learning platforms like the Khan Academy or other learning management systems where there are some basic algorithms for, say, predicting what students know or providing personalized recommendations. And a lot of those have seen broad usership. I would say on the whole that US schools have not taken full advantage of what's available. Part of that is because many of the most exciting things have only developed in the last 5 or 10 years. So there's a lot of very new things which do have a high impact potential, but haven't reached all of the schools yet.
Is Khan Academy using artificial intelligence?
So I don't work
or,
at the
or
Khan
it's
Academy,
not part of it. No, I'm asking because I know
yeah.
Khan Academy, but just asking.
Yeah, so I say that as a
since you mention it.
Yeah, I can't speak to the internals too much, but I have read, for example, some of their published research, and I see like what kinds of people they're hiring. They do education data analytics and apply some machine learning to things like determining whether or not a student needs to keep practicing. So for many of their math examples, they might have a type of problem that a student can do a certain number of times. And then the question is, how many times do you make the student do that before they can move on?
That is my question.
Yeah, so they do have some aspects of AI and some machine learning and some different components of their system.
Yeah, because what do you think about the idea of having a machine and of having the tool that really needs you to master a content? Because sometimes it's very hard. They ask some questions for you to get through that are not really the questions that are easy for you to understand what they want. So instead of you mastering the content, you get really bored and decide not to continue doing the exercise or the quiz or whatever, because it is so boring to do and do and do, because the idea is you must master the content. Beautiful, I agree. But you have to have very specific questions that really conduct you to the answer. Sometimes you answer correctly, but it's not the question that the machine is prepared to accept as correct answer. And then, so what's your opinion about this?
Yeah, I think this is a classic example of measuring slightly the wrong thing. So the assessment or the mastery system, its only objective is to keep the student practicing until they master it. But as a consequence, it's not measuring things like the student interest, student motivation. It also has some mistakes in the kinds of answers it accepts, and it's not able to accommodate differences in the ways that students express themselves. I think in the long term, AI is getting better at those things. One of the things that's challenging is that it requires a lot of education expertise to recognize those problems. One of the things that AI can do to kind of improve that is to design their systems around student incentives. So one of the things that I do in my work, student review and memorization also has this problem of being boring. It's very helpful for them educationally, but no student wants to sit down and practice flashcards. And so one of the things that I've done is worked with educational designers who have been able to turn some of those review activities into high interactivity games that have a lot more variety and are able to hold students' interest longer. We've also thought about ways to reward students for doing hard work. And so one of the mechanisms we introduced into our platform is that when students successfully review something, they earn the ability to unlock different rewards in in the system. So I think a large part of that is really coming from the education side, rethinking the design of the system to be sure it's solving the right problem.
So perhaps games would help students to get really involved with the exercises, with the machine learning, right? I don't know if I asked the right question. If you understood what I meant.
Because I think that students are motivated when they see challenges as approachable and they get validation from having accomplished it. I think lots of times education is set up to mostly tell students when they're wrong, and otherwise it's very boring. And taking some lessons from game design, which is very good at engaging people and keeping them interested in difficult problems, can definitely help us to design better educational systems.
What else now you can tell us about artificial intelligence and education that is really interesting for us who are non-experts in the field?
Yeah, I think one of the really exciting things to me, I want to come back to, is the ability to facilitate human relationships. I'm not working on this right now, but eventually I would love to work on a system that pairs mentors with students and also recommends peer relationships for students who can help each other to learn and to grow. I think that being able to recognize kind of patterns in data and pull out maybe unexpected connections, friendships or relationships that students might not have otherwise formed is a really interesting opportunity, not just for education, but also for improving the cohesiveness of our society as a whole. So that's something that I'm really excited about, again, for the future.
For the future.
I almost think like an Uber or Airbnb of tutoring or of teaching, where maybe you can like meet people based on what you need and the expertise that they have. And I think that a system like that would empower people to do the things that they're best at as humans, in terms of forming connections, communicating, being creative, and would kind of take away a lot of the boring logistical work.
Do you think that the teachers who are really the ones who are excited about trying different things are the ones who really want to use artificial intelligence? Or do you think we can convince the traditional teachers, the ones who only think about their way of teaching and don't believe in something new, can also be motivated to use artificial intelligence? Anyone can use artificial intelligence, or do you think only the really motivated teachers, the ones who really like to improve, to choose different things, to really interact with the students, who think the students are participants of the learning process, or not?
This is definitely almost a sales question, right? It's how do you present the benefits of artificial intelligence in a way that maybe traditional teachers or traditionalist teachers are able to accept them. I think the biggest thing is showing ways that it allows them to do what they do even better. So if you tell a traditional educator that you're going to do their job but better, then they can feel threatened and offended by that. But if you tell them that you're going to reduce the amount of time they have to spend grading, most teachers are okay with that, particularly if they see that the results are generally good and that they're able to override the system if there are any mistakes or issues. So I think that's really a question of presenting the benefits as empowering teachers as opposed to disempowering them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I asked all the questions I wanted to ask you. It was a great opportunity to meet you. I hope we can see each other again sometime. And if you have ideas about this artificial intelligence in education and the uses that really matter to teachers and students, and how to make them excited about using artificial intelligence. I am really excited about using technology in all my classes. So I am out of the context. I think it would be a good idea to have another meet and discuss this. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd be delighted.
Okay, so thank you, Sam, very much for your time. And I really appreciated your answers. And thank you. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.